When Evelyn stepped off the dusty train into the fading light of the New Mexico plains, she clutched a letter promising love, stability, and a husband. But the man who penned those words was nowhere to be found. Instead, standing before her, in oversized boots and tear-streaked faces, were 7 children, alone, hungry, and waiting. She hadn't just arrived at a stranger's doorstep. She'd walked into a mystery wrapped in silence. And as the wind whispered through the empty homestead, Evelyn would soon uncover a truth far darker than abandonment. One that would test everything she believed about duty, love, and justice. Evelyn Monroe wasn't born for the hard life. Raised in a modest home back east, she spent her days sewing, reading, and dreaming of something more. When her father's passing left her destitute and alone, the mail-order bride advertisements felt less like desperation and more like divine timing. One letter in particular stood out, written by a man named Thomas Harding, widowed farmer, seeking a strong yet gentle soul to help raise his children and build a life together on a quiet piece of land. His words were kind, thoughtful. He included a photo rough, but warm. There was no sign of deceit, so she boarded the train with hope tucked inside her trunk, believing she'd find a place to belong. But nothing could prepare her for what awaited in Cedar Hollow. The home was quiet, the land dry and overgrown. No husband met her at the station, only the oldest child, a boy no older than 12, holding a sign with her name and eyes far too hollow for his age. The house was worn, its walls paper-thin, and its pantry nearly bare. There were 7 children, in all, each carrying a silence that spoke louder than words. There were no answers, only more questions. Where was Thomas? 8. Why had he brought her here? Why did the neighbors look away when she asked? Evelyn tried to make sense of it all. The children offered no explanation, only quiet routines that hinted at survival without guidance. The eldest kept the younger ones fed. The middle children did chores like clockwork. It was as if they'd learned long ago not to expect help or kindness. She scoured the house for clues. No recent letters, no sign of travel plans. Thomas's name was nowhere on legal papers. His clothes were still in the closet, yet his presence felt like a ghost in the walls. Evelyn sent telegrams, no replies. Rode into town and asked the sheriff, who avoided her gaze. The storekeeper grew tight-lipped. Even the local preacher changed the subject when she brought up the Hardings. Then she saw Iton old newspaper clipping tucked beneath a floorboard in the barn. It was yellowed, nearly crumbling, but the headline was clear: local farmer involved in land dispute with freedmen settlers, tensions rise in Cedar Hollow. The article described an altercation between Thomas Harding and a nearby black family who had recently claimed land under the Homestead Act. The tone was veiled in bias. The subtext was unmistakable. Racial tension, greed, and power had collided, and someone had disappeared. What the paper didn't say, the locals whispered: a fire, a family forced to flee in the night, and Thomas missing, presumed dead by some, but protected by others. Evelyn realized she wasn't just in the middle of abandonment. She was standing on land soaked in injustice, where truth had been buried beneath silence. And now, she was responsible for 7 children caught in the crossfire. The decision came one night as a storm rolled in. The roof leaked. The baby cried. And Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with the deed in her hand, signed in Thomas's name. A name that likely carried more than just absence, it carried blood. She could leave. No one would stop her. No one cared. But as thunder cracked across the sky, she looked at those children, half asleep, half afraid, and knew walking away would be the final betrayal. It's not just of them, but of herself. She gathered the few valuables in the home, hitched the wagon, and rode through the rain toward the freedmen's settlement on the edge of town. They watched her approach with suspicion, bracing for harm. But Evelyn didn't come to condemn. She came to listen. The matriarch of the family told her what really happened. How Thomas had falsely accused them of theft to scare them off their legal land claim. When they resisted, he gathered a mob. What followed was violence, destruction, and silence, enforced by fear. Evelyn wept. Not just for them, but for the children now orphaned by a man she had trusted. A man who used words to deceive and power to destroy. But that night, something shifted. The settlement offered help not because she deserved it, but because the children did. Because breaking cycles often requires grace from those who've been wronged. In the months that followed, Evelyn stayed. She rebuilt the homestead with help from those once cast out, taught the children to read, tilled the land alongside the same hands once condemned by their father. The town watched, unsure whether to scorn or admire. But Evelyn didn't care. She wasn't there to win approval. She was there to raise those children in truth, not silence. In kindness, not power. She never wore a wedding ring. Never called herself a wife. But every child called her mama. Years later, people still told stories of the white woman who crossed the line of race, of class, of expectations, to raise a family not born of blood, but of choice. And long after the headlines faded and the land disputes became footnotes, Evelyn's legacy remained, because sometimes justice doesn't come with a gavel or a grave. It comes with bread baked by calloused hands, bedtime stories, whispered in candlelight, a woman who refused to walk away. So ask yourself, when you inherit someone else's silence, do you keep it buried? Or do you dare to speak even if your voice shakes?